Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Data Engineering Weekly Radio. We took a short break. Aswin been traveling a lot, meeting a lot of data practitioners on the ground. So we took like a week of break right now. So now we are back. We are back with discussing Data Engineering Weekly Edition 132. It's been a fast forward because we kind of lagged a little bit. So we wanted to kind of discuss about what is happening in the latest side of it. So that's why you see some kind of a lift in the editions that we are discussing. And as usual, we have Ashwin with us. Hi, Ashwin.
Hey Anand, hey everyone. Like Anand said, I've been traveling. I think I did 8 cities over the last 2 to 3 weeks in
Mhm.
US, in Europe, and in India. A lot of learnings on the ground in terms of what's happening in the enterprises, largely while they are slow to adopt the technology movement. There are a lot of interesting things happening, right? So I think some of the topics that we'll discuss today, data quality is important. Uh, uh, Focus on Lakehouse is gaining a lot of steam. Open table formats is becoming a central point of discussion, and a lot of new designs are basically going through a delta iceberg or a hoodie kind of a open table format as part of their implementation, refactoring some of their old legacy file formats. So yeah, I think the theme has been something that me and Anand have been discussing for the last couple of weeks. That's essentially what is an observation, but I think it's getting amplified. And just to give context, right, and just to divert from there into the first topic of the day is data quality, right? We've been sharing that a lot, our experiences and the authors' experiences as well around quality observability, contracts, mesh products. I think we are at a time where people are having unlimited resource, unlimited compute power, elevated snowflake bills or the cloud costs, but they're not able to still make actionable insights because the trust is not there in the data, right? So how do you establish trust? Anand, with that, we should take one of your favorite topics and mine as well. Let's jump. Not a week goes by without talking that.
I believe like even if I don't want to talk about data contract, I cannot really escape from talking about data contract.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's a talk of the town. And the
Challenge.
other part is the other important part is it is what is missing today, right? A collaborative contract-based platforms to
Right.
solve things on the left hand side.
Yeah, the first article that we're going to discuss about is on DPT model contracts, like importance and pitfalls, by the author Roman Marrero. I think it's a very interesting, like I mean, this is like DBT kind of announced that we're going to adopt data contract as a first class semantics in the data transformation layer, and they kind of put down the spec of like why this is needed. I think DBT also kind of talked about it, elaborate on that. And schema breaking changes, data quality checks, like lack of data quality, there's been a bigger concern in the data transformation layer. So this article in specific is kind of talking about the first part is talking about why DBT model contracts are important. I think the author's talking about why data quality and consistency is important, enhancing predictability and reducing the ambiguity, reducing the errors and preventing propagation. There's a lot of good things about how DBT kind of done that. What is your general take on that, Ashwin, on DBT side?
I think, like you say, Anand, and I think you've been an active evangelist in this particular area as well around how to build contracts with your schemata as well. I think it's a fantastic space to be in. This particular blog written by Raman talks about the importance of contracts, importance of how you approach that from a DBT lifecycle perspective, and how contract specifications helps you to avoid the bad data from entering, right? So I think there are two parts to it, right? One, you can definitely enforce schema level constraints at the while the data is getting inserted, but during the code processing itself, right? So how can you have a more flexible a markup language type specification defined. I think that's what the DBT contracts is all about, right? So
Yeah.
that flexibility to add constraints, the flexibility to add what you would expect on top of it. The blog is quite detailed. It talks about what is possible, what's not possible. How do you what's a limitation if you're using a lot of views? What will happen? But it covers in general the full life cycle and the importance of reliable data pipelines and how we should use that.
Yeah, the thing is like kind of very attractive to me to this article is the reason why I kind of featured in data engineering weekly is that I talked about pitfalls of DBT model contracts and examples of it. I found it's very interesting. Like I think one thing I really liked about this is like kind of a very non-vendor
Correct.
way opinionated this articles like now there's been DBT model came in and like the SQL mesh kind of saying like oh this is really wrong. There's like vendors having a different takes on those things when it comes from a data practitioner side of it that
Correct.
really can gives a good opinion and like a very good way to contact about it.
Totally. I think the problems are even with a DBT model or a contract is what if you have 1,000 models? What if
Yeah.
what if you're producing more than how much you can actually monitor, right? And the second part is you define a YAML specification, but how do you collaboratively work between your
Right.
consumers and your producers, right? In defining what can be expected and defining that contract once. Right, the reinforcement of it, the collaboration of it, particularly in large enterprise projects, would seem a very bit challenging, right? So, how do you think, Anand, we should address that part? What any recommendations on that?
I think the key piece of data contract is a collaboration. It like data transformation or data creation is very collaborative work. I think what we have created over the period, like pretty good tools and educations around what it means to create the data, but
Yeah,
we have never invented or discussed a lot about how do we enable collaboration
yeah,
on top of it. I think that's where the key part of it, in my opinion. For example, like software development is a very collaborative work. How do we solve that? Jira is a collaborative tool. Like even though
right.
you kind of you like dislike whatever your take on that, it is
Yeah,
collaborative, right? So and then like okay, I need to push some code to production. I need a collaborative layer where it is GitHub. Fundamentally, if you think GitHub as a code repository, the way GitHub works is actually a collaborative layer. You need to have somebody to approve, you can create your own workflow, you can systematically enable a collaboration between those things.
correct.
These are the critical components that enable what I call is as the industrial scale software development. And the real question is like what is the tool, what are the set of the tools that are going to enable an industrial scale software development? If you take data creation, data value creation, it's a typical value stream mapping. Somebody has to create a raw data, putting that data in here. You have to mash different components together, and then you have to produce a value. It is nothing different from a typical factory way of working, right? Like
Yeah,
if you're manufacturing certain things, you have to source some raw materials and you have to refine it. You have to transport to somewhere else. There's a supply chain problem there. Then you have to fine tune the product and then finish the product and deliver to the market essentially.
yeah,
So the data engineering problem is exactly the same as a typical manufacturing event. I think uh, some we lack in the industry a holistic solution to enable moving the supply chain faster. Right?
totally.
Yeah, I think that's one of the bigger factors. That's that.
I think people who are listening to this should definitely read the blog.
Yeah,
Quite elaborative, covers most of the details. But I think you should also explore schemata. That's on the open source project that Anand is publishing as well. So I think explore that, and I think do share your views on how to implement data contracts and how are you implementing contracts in your organization as well.
Yeah, as usual, if you wanted to talk about data contract or anything, just feel free to DM me or Aswin. We're happy to share our, understanding about data contract, schemata, or whatever you want to talk about it. We're happy to jump on the call and discuss about it.
Perfect. And that's a good segue into the second topic. I think that was in most of the meetings that I've been having with people of late.
Yeah.
Lake houses, event streaming platforms. I think the world revolves around 4 or 5 topics only most of the weeks, and it's a common pattern, a common theme that I've been observing. Right, Anand, how about you?
Yeah, I think it is an eventual reality. There's a very interesting fact about like the open format of storing the data and retrieving the data and interoperability among the data, whether you are going with a property solution, like a Databricks is the one integrated solution, or Apache Hudi kind of an open systems. I think people figured it out. It's like it is much efficient to store and retrieve on a scale that company is kind of growing, and especially the amount of data that each and every company now started. Like what it used to be a Google's problem, now every company's problem. Right, the amount of data that we are gathering, amount of feature that companies are gathering. So it's a very interesting trend, and it comes from Instacart. I was talking about how Instacart adds modularized data pipeline with LakeHouse Architecture and Spark. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Being a very big users of Snowflake, now they're moving away from Snowflake to this one. It's an interesting trend to watch, in my opinion.
Totally. I think in an earlier blog and an earlier data engineering weekly session, we did share the importance of using lake houses as well as the open table format. This is an implementation blog which talks about how Instacart went about implementing the logics, how they refactored their old Kinesis with Lakehouse plus Spark based implementation, right? So it's pretty interesting in terms of how they've implemented it as well.
Right. They're talking about reducing the AWS cost because I think the fundamental thing is like if you're adopting something else, whether you're optimizing for Snowflake cost or you're optimizing your cloud cost.
Yeah, totally.
A major role in the architectural design.
I think totally right. So see, there is an out of the box service provided. Obviously, yes, it's going to be easier to use. So it comes at a cost, but it would not be a lot more flexible at times. So uh, that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
And the limitations in terms of the file format supported when it comes to Kinesis Firos, uh, which is their event streaming thing, right? So while
Yeah.
S3 supports all the open table formats, particularly around data lake implementations, the Kinesis Firehouse did not support everything, right? So it's still restricted to CSV, JSON, and Parquet format. So that's a limitation. Clearly, particularly when people do a lot of heavy reading for analytical processing. So, and that's why we jump onto an open table format, right? Easier to switch over, helps you abstract the storage from the choice of engine that you will use, particularly if you're choosing something like Iceberg or Delta, right? So that's some of the primary reasons. Again, there are technical engineering reasons here as well. The flexibility, the SLA that's required, the file size that they are dealing with. So there are specifications that the blog covers. Strongly recommend you to read that as well. So those are more on engineering specific, but a high level summary is they moved from an architecture that was using Kinesis Firos to refactored that to an open table format, leveraging Spark. Obviously, yes, they have to replace Kinesis with something. So that obviously Kafka is there, which is running and implemented over a Delta Lake. Right?
Yeah. I think a couple of patterns kind of very interesting in this article from Instacart. One is like they're talking about modularizing pipeline with Apache Spark. The
That's
code before
interesting.
give an example like giant SQL code, and then they kind of showcasing how they kind of modularize a Spark SQL. They still use SQL, but it kind of Spark SQL, and with a wrapper on top of data frame, and like much more modularized the way kind of doing this one. Common table expression in SQL is kind of one one way to get this modularization. I think this is a larger problem, and I think many people trying to fight against the SQL. I think the major problem always is like the modularity, right? Like how can we decompose the problem, test it, and then rebuild from the ground up, which is very easy to do it in the programming language perspective, but not necessarily in a SQL perspective. That's a first pattern I found out very, very interesting through that one. And the second pattern is that incremental event processing. This is kind of very interesting to me. Is the first line they kind of mentioning in this thing, processing a continuous stream of data with a large batch execution is not an event. Streaming provide advantages over batch processing in terms of the latency, scalability, and resource utilization. I think this is a very I think more and more I completely agree with that. I always say it makes sense to process like 30 minutes data, and then you cumulatively do the aggregation as long as the metrics that you are computing is additive metrics. If it is non-additive, you cannot do any incremental processing anyway. I understand some clever way to do that one. Like it's easy to process a 30 minutes data versus 24 hours data. You will have much more predictability and reliability of your data processing pipeline. Now, the fundamental question is like, how does the LakeHouse formats like Delta Lake, Hudi, and Iceberg going to adopt the incremental data processing as a first-class citizen? I know for a fact Hudi does that pretty well. I think that's a very
that's a differentiator also.
Differentiator for Hudi to that one.
Yes.
Now the real question is like, how far Hudi going to take it out and say like, hey, this is a way you should process the data, and this is what it also involved not only the technical complexities, but also like technology details, but also like, okay, what is the data format? Like, so what are the data modeling techniques that can be adopted in incremental data pipeline, kind of educating the large consumer base and building this whole structure around that. I think that is going to define the success of LakeHouse formats in general. What do you think, Aswin?
Totally. I think can't agree enough. And the blog towards the end, right, is quoting the author in Radas as well in terms of how the LakeHouse architecture has streamlined the storage and consumption and reducing the cost as well, right? So I think it's a common theme. I would say almost everybody would carefully evaluate or have already started evaluating and refactoring some of their modules to an open table format, and it's just going to capture from you. It's not right. The only thing is around event streaming and structured streaming over Spark. Which table format to choose, something that you need to understand and choose what's right for you.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a good segue for the other article that we wanted to kind of talk about. I think we kind of touched a little bit on that, like from Abhishek Roy about credit size on talking about using Jira to automate updates in addition of Blue Table. I found this very, very fascinating. The concept of like, okay, you can create a Jira for a table change, and I can actually go and automate the table change. That was like a very interesting way of approaching the workflow supply chain management side of it. Have you seen any kind of cases, Aswin, in your experience, like similar aspect of it, or like?
Yeah, so yes and no. When they start, no. Then for more mature organizations where there are data teams that are specifically meant to do this, I'm not able to remember the right term here. That was used by Aman in one of his team is called like that at Akamai. They have a tag team, something like a tiger team or whatnot, right? So their job is to ensure they're able to do that. But the author here talks about automating things, right? So it's not a manual effort. It's completely automated. How they are approaching this entire code change, how they are leveraging the glue crawler, the problems with glue crawler, right? And all of that. So I have seen people use a similar pattern in some of the projects, but I don't remember if somebody has documented it really well, but not with Jira, right? So definitely there.
Yeah, totally. I've seen this kind of pattern of Jira automation, like in Jira Ops, in the DevOps side of it and IT operation side of it a lot. It's great to see something on the data engineering side of it, in the similar automations perspective here.
Yeah, correct. The interesting part is they did try the single massive script approach, right?
Mhm.
Now with the staggered approach of people open up a ticket and how the crawler acts as well. I think they've kind of streamlined the entire process in my point of view, right?
Mhm.
And it's a step by step process as opposed to a one script goes and updates everything.
Right. Yeah, totally. I think the last interesting article about is the extensive guide for server-side tracking. I think it's all close to kind of data creation. That's one of the areas that I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, I was
And
about to actually pull you on this, right? You write a lot of articles around server-side tracking, as and very close to event tracking systems as well. Uh, Based on your understanding, right? What's the problem here between client side and server side in the context of data privacy today, right?
yeah,
Uh, how do you see people should approach this particular problem statement, and how do data teams play a role in this? Because usually, my observation on this, when it comes to tracking, it's usually the request comes from marketing or growth teams, right? And
right.
engineering teams are like, and the engineering teams largely, not even the data engineering teams are the ones creating the client side tracking codes and developing all of that. I would like
Right.
to pull your brains and take your experience on this.
Yeah, totally. I think whatever the problem that the author is kind of highlighting in this extensive server-side server-side tracking here is it's true because like after the developers are not involved in like what kind of event that we should track and then educating of all those things, developers do track events in the scope of an application, whether the application is working correct or not. You use some log or a data log or something like that to do that one. But business operation is kind of completely different. It is a different context. The reason is like the growth and the sales and the product, the way they see the data in a very different way. And to kind of, it's very hard for an engineer to go and then if any system that we kind of design that engineers go and pull the requirement from all the other different stakeholders, it's bound to failure, because different stakeholders have a different expectation or a different view about what kind of event they should gather or not. So I think in on all practical way that development will not be involved in these cases is because it makes sense because that's not the primary focus. The stakeholders has to come across and do more work and to understand what developers can deliver their side of it. But the challenge with the front end, even in specific that you're asking about, one is like number one reason is like the speed of change management. If it is a web application, the release cycle is different between the entire software development lifecycle itself is different for developing your mobile application like iOS and
Correct.
Android versus the web applications, right? So if you found some issues there, you can quickly roll out some changes for web applications, whereas iOS and Android, it's not very easy to do that. So it makes sense to track more on the server side rather than in the client side of it. The second aspect is that the client side events can be easily tampered. You can spoof in, you can send whatever the malicious event that you wanted to send that, whereas server side events are delivered from your server, and you can have much more authentication and security access around that. So, I mean, it's a general term. Like if you are working in some enterprises, and if you have to report some number that is kind of auditable, you cannot really rely on the client side events. You have to depend upon your server side event purely because the trustability and reliability and the regulatory requirement perspective, essentially. I think these are the bigger challenges I feel with the front end events.
Correct. But server-side tracking is becoming more popular in each ways, right? Just to handle all the regulatory requirements. Obviously, yes, you don't get the full data, but then server-side is is what I have seen a lot of companies take up, particularly if they are restricted on the regulatory side.
Right. I mean, it is a balance, right? Like, for example, if you are developing a user experience where major user action doesn't need to send any user activity back to the server, like, you're filling a form, you're just navigating to different things, and there's kind of a funnel way kind of user use that one. So in those kind of an applications, it's hard to rely only on server side event. You will get only your granularity will get lost.
Right.
So if you are looking at it kind of, oh, I want to do a user funnel analytics, like how do we want the users do that one in a non-trustable way, not like an authentic way to kind of making a decision out of any product decisions or any financial monetary decision that you want to take out of it. I wouldn't recommend to go with the front-end events, but front-end events can give you a lot of glimpse, like a lot of in-depth view, especially the funnel analytics of the user journey. It'll be very interesting to see that one.
Yeah, totally. And that ties back to the article that we just discussed earlier, right? How to build streaming pipelines, because when it comes to tracking and all that, it's all streaming most of the time. If you want to, depending on your use case, you can pretty much comfortably do a batch, but we are seeing a lot more near real time use cases getting built up. Right? So that you should. While this particular blog largely talks about how server-side tracking is implemented and all that, I think you should also read in context of the previous blog to understand event tracking. That is definitely picking up. And refer to the Instacart blog as well and how it applies for data teams.
Yeah, totally.
Potential architecture that we can follow.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's great. I think wonderful discussion, Ashwin. Great articles, great. Thank you so much for the authors to kind of put together incredible insights to our readers. Always happy to discuss more on that. You have any parting thoughts or like any experience that you want to share with your trip? Any glimpse to your readers?
No, yeah, I think you pretty much summarized, Anand. I think credits to the authors who are contributing and all the hard work that goes behind the efforts. The blogs are basically a reflection of the hard work that has gone within their companies, which could have taken anywhere from 3 months to 1 year. So yeah, thank you for contributing, and I think thank you, Anand, for taking those blogs as part of your engineering weekly, right? So
awesome. Until see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Good, wonderful week ahead. Thank you. Bye.